Hey everybody. I know it has been a while since we have posted a new episode. It's actually all the way back in June was our last one. And I don't have the date off the top of my head, but as you can see in the feed, I spoke with James Harleman. If you happen to miss that one, check it out. We were talking about summer movies. James is the author of Cinemagog. He's been on the podcast, I guess, twice now. But that was our last discussion, last interview, and I thought I would have something sooner. So apologies for those of you who are just waking up every day, looking at your podcast feed and not getting anything. So we actually are in the process of changing the structure of this podcast and the name of this podcast. And so I'll give you some more details about that in just a little bit. But just kind of backing up, the plan was, I guess, even backing up further, last summer, we actually recorded podcasts at the different summer conferences for RYM. I would meet with different youth workers, speakers that were at the conferences, and we would talk about all sorts of things. And this past summer, we decided not to do that, just to have a break for the summer. And so basically the months of June and July were planned to take off. And then we're going to relaunch back in August. And I actually recorded a podcast to post in August, and then we decided not to. And I recorded it with Linda. We were just kind of talking about some articles that were helpful that we had read recently, and some other things. And that was the plan, that we had it recorded. So out there, who knows, we might drop it in this channel eventually. But as we're talking about changing the name of this podcast, I was meeting with Joey Kime, who's on staff with RYM that many of you know. And he's does a lot of things, but gifted in graphics as well. And so he was working on the graphics for the new logo for this podcast. And we just kind of had a conversation of just a lot of things about the podcast and kind of the vision for the podcast moving forward. And really from that discussion, we decided to, and I'm not intending to do the pun here, but press pause. We decided to press pause on the podcast. So sorry for the pun. To really kind of sit down and talk and think about this podcast moving forward. We've pretty much since 2017, this has been a consistent podcast, and we've been doing new episodes for the most part weekly since 2017. And I'm just kind of scrolling back through. Yeah. Number 446 was our last one. So 446 episodes. And we're just kind of thinking about this podcast moving forward, and how we can best serve churches, serve youth workers, serve parents, those who are, as we've said plenty of times on this podcast, full-time, part-time, volunteers in youth ministry. And so, we just had those conversations, and we're still continuing to kind of iron that out. So I'm being vague about some of it just because we haven't arrived at some conclusions. But I do want to say, and kind of jumping back a little bit, as we planned to start this podcast back in August, I actually had a few interviews scheduled. One of those were with two CCEF, that's Christian Counseling and Educational Foundation, two of their staff, Darby Strickland and Mike Emlett. Some of you may have heard of them before. Some of you may have read some of what they've written. But part of the reason I wanted to do that was because we were trying to highlight their new conference, their upcoming conference that they have in Chattanooga. As far as I know, there's still time to register for that conference. And so I want to definitely point people to that. I've actually been asked to speak there, and I'll have two workshops. The titles of those workshops, one is Fostering Embodied Routines in Youth. And so talking about just kind of the tactile needs that our students have and kind of digging into that. And then the second one is the restless nature of technology. So the overall theme of the conference is rest. I know Kelly Kapic will be one of the main speakers, as well as Ed Welch and Darby Strickland, Mike Emlett, just a lot of the CCEF faculty, as well as those outside of the faculty. But I'll put a link in the show notes and would love it if some of the other RYM staff will be at this conference. Would love it if some of you join us in Chattanooga. And again, it's the first weekend in October. I think off the top of my head, it's 4th, 5th, 6th, somewhere in there of October. But I want to definitely encourage people to register. And like I said, Mike and Darby were scheduled to come on, and just grateful to them of making the time to want to come on the podcast. I also was planning on having Bill Smith come on the podcast. As many of you know, we released the newest series in the track series. We have a book on politics by Josh Wester. We have Living Out Reformed Theology by Harrison Perkins. And then the track series on rest, a student's guide to rest by William P. Smith. And so Bill was going to come on the podcast to discuss that entry in the track series, and definitely just, again, want to point people to those track resources, and to also say the newest series of track books has actually come out by the time that this airs. Those new 3 titles are A Student's Guide to Grief by Paul Tausches, Student's Guide to Body Image by Julie Lowe, and then A Female Student's Guide to Pornography by Helen Thorne. And so I'm fairly certain you can get those on Amazon right now. As I always want to point people to Christian-focused publications, you can order these in bulk through their site. And so oftentimes, depending on the quantity that you're ordering, sometimes you can get these books for $2.50 each, something like that, or cheaper than, I think most Amazon, it might be $3.99. Some of them are $4.99, but ordering in bulk for those of you youth leaders that are out there, you can buy a bunch of these and use this as a small group study. They're designed to be read easily in a group and have some discussion questions. And so definitely want to encourage you to check out the track series and continue to point people to those. So going back to the new podcast title, spent a lot of time on this, and the new title is going to be the RYM Podcast. And I know that sounds just so unoriginal, so just lacking in creativity. But there actually is some intentionality behind this, as simple as it may sound, to just name it the RYM Podcast. Some of this is just very practical and logistical, I guess you could say. Sometimes people search for the RYM podcast as the local youth worker, and they cannot find it as they just search RYM podcast. The local youth worker doesn't always pop up quickly and easily. And so just the searchability of this podcast, we thought it would be easier to just name it the RYM podcast. Also, as we named it the local youth worker when we started this, before we, got into podcasting and we were just kind of brainstorming as a staff, we said, okay, if we do a podcast, who's the primary audience? And we said, well, clearly youth leaders. That's who we wanted to aim at first. It was youth leaders that are out, in the local church, as I said, full-time, part-time, volunteer. That was our audience. And so we aimed to create a podcast that was for youth leaders specifically. And as we started dropping these episodes and through the years, we found out parents were listening to this podcast. And so we also had started a Parenting Today podcast by RYM. And then COVID ended up killing that podcast. And so since we kind of had this one that was aimed at parents, we have a student podcast that we hope to resurrect one day. And then we have this one for youth leaders. We thought, well, let's kind of merge the two with parents and youth leaders. And really some of the feedback we've heard from several people is that, when it's named the local youth worker, parents may see that and think, well, this is for youth leaders and not really for me. But if you tune in consistently, you know that we have youth leaders on here. We have seminary professors, we have counselors, we have parents, we have youth leaders, obviously, that are parents. And so much of the content that's out here anyway is just for adults. And so naming it the RYM podcast is hopefully just a way to broaden the audience that we're trying to reach with this, and feel more inclusive of not just youth leaders, but those who are outside of youth ministry. And so, with that being said, you need to know that you won't need to subscribe elsewhere for this podcast. That if you are subscribed to the local youth worker, eventually, as we change the name, the feed's just going to change. It's going to have a new logo, a new title, but it's still this channel. So you won't need to go search for it again or anything like that. And as far as we know, all of the previous episodes will still be in the feed. And so, again, we have 446 episodes that you can go back through, and they should remain on the RYM podcast channel. So stay tuned for more updates. We do hope to get some interviews out to you soon, and then maybe even share just some vision, some planning for this podcast. We want it to continue because, one of the encouragements was this past summer of getting to meet many of you who listen to this and who are benefited by it. And so we want to continue to have guests come on this podcast that encourage you, that feed you, that edify you, that challenge you. We want to continue to have people come on that reach and speak to adults, broadly speaking. Again, not just those who are in local youth ministry in the church. So thanks for tuning in. And again, stay tuned for more details about the podcast. Have a good day.